you wanted to know about Mr. Douglass?
I would love to. Yeah, Frederick.
Oh, Mr.
Frederick Douglass.
Well, you know, when he arrived here, he wasn't Mr. Douglass at all. It wasn't Frederick Douglass at all. His name was Frederick Bailey, you see. And he had come with his wife. You could maybe tell him the story of how that happened, like before he got here.
Actually, it's an interesting one because he had tried to escape from slavery once before in his life, been caught, beaten within an inch of his life.
Oh,
and he was talking about leaving again. Finally had gained enough confidence of his master that he was sent back to Baltimore because he was a good worker and he'd be hired out. Well, in Baltimore, he met a young woman, lovely person.
Oh,
Anna Murray. And Anna is a free black woman, very clever lady, very clever, and very pleasant. She's a neighbor of ours, actually.
Oh.
And interestingly enough, when he said that he wanted to leave and he was going to escape slavery, well, she said, well, don't do it the same way you tried before because you'll never succeed. That's too dangerous, much too dangerous. She said, you've worked with free men on the docks. You know what they sound like. You can sound the same way. I'll make you a sailor suit and I'll buy you a set of protection papers because every man had to have protection papers. Think about it, after 1812, you know, Isaac was caught up in 1812 and ended up on a prison ship because the British just impressed our folks and said, you'll fight for us. And he said, oh, no, I won't. And therefore, he ended up on a prison ship.
But he was lucky because he was a sailor. He knew how to run a ship and how to take care of a ship. So they put him on a ship, right?
Well, there wasn't any room at Dartmoor prison. And it's probably a good thing because a lot of those folks didn't make it. But he was a good sailor. And so they bring him out every time there was a storm. At least he had food to eat and he survived. But quite frankly, everybody needed to have these protection papers. And they're very vague, you know. It says, for example, Isaac says, Isaac Blythe, born Middleborough, Massachusetts. Then, about, I don't know when he was born, 1790 or so. And then, or 93, who knows when he was born? He doesn't remember. And I wasn't born yet, so I certainly don't. And consequently, what ended up happening is you'd have this vague age, and then about such and such height. And in my case, my husband's had light brown hair and blue eyes. Well, all they had to do was find someone who was tall, had dark skin, and dark hair, and dark eyes. And that would fit for Mr. Douglass or anybody else. And so she bought him a set of those papers. She also bought him a ticket to get from Baltimore to New York City.
He almost got caught, but he did not.
That's the thing, you have to have enough fortitude to put that across, and he did. He certainly was a striking man. And then, when he got to Baltimore, she had bought a ticket too, but not for the same train. They wouldn't be on the same train together. And they met up again in New York.
That's where they got married.
Yes, that's where they got married. And then they took the steamer from New York to Newport.
And that's when they met Mr. Ricketson and Mr. Tabor.
They're both good Quaker gentlemen. And Mr. Douglass was trying to figure out how he would have enough money to get on further to New Bedford because he thought, well, it's a big port. I should be able to find work there. The only problem was they had run out of money at that point. So what to do? And Mr. Ricketson said, get the inn, friend. So they got as far as here. And they left their luggage as sort of collateral and then walked up the hill to Nathan and Polly Johnson's.
Yes. Now, Mr. Johnson paid to get the luggage, and so his luggage was brought up. Their luggage was brought up, and the next thing is they decided that Frederick should change his name. Of course,
everybody was choosing the name Johnson.
Everybody was picking Johnson, you know, and so Frederick.
It's like wearing a sign that says, "I'm a runaway slave." I don't think that's a very bright thing.
No, probably not. So Frederick wanted to take on Mr. Johnson's name in honor of the man that was helping him, but Mr. Johnson said, oh no, that's probably not a good idea. Now, Mr. Johnson was reading the book Lady of the Lake, and I understand the main character in that book, his name is Douglass.
Ah.
So he suggested the name Douglass. And so Frederick thought that was a good name. He promised his mother he would not change his first name. He would always be Frederick. And he took on Douglass, but he added an extra S at the end because then it was his name. It wasn't someone else's
Right.
name. It was his name. And that was very important to him. Very important to him. Well, they stayed with the Johnsons for a short time,
They did.
and then they moved. Had a little apartment up on was it Elm Street? Was it Elm Street? I believe was the first place that he
Oh,
went.
that's not far from here.
Yes,
No.
not far from here at all. Nope, just up the
Oh,
street.
well,
a bit.
everything is pretty nearby, you know, you can walk from place to place, and we certainly do. And that's when little Rosetta was born.
That's right. That's right. And little Rosetta remembers all kinds of things, I think, from her days here.
She was the sweet little girl.
She was very sweet.
Oh,
And
so-
then came little Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Was he named after Louis Temple?
I'd heard say that he
Because
might have
Mary
been.
Temple
And Anna were friends.
Anna are very good friends.
And do you know about Mr. Temple? Mr. Temple was a blacksmith here in the area, and
He invented that toggle harpoon. You know, when you have just a regular,
harpoon that looks like an
Harpoon.
arrow.
that's not very good. It hits the whale. Whale's not going to sit there and say, "Go ahead, hit me." It's wiggling and wriggling, and it doesn't stick in.
Oh.
So if there's any possibility, you know, it would pop out. But once they made that toggle harpoon, there was a little piece of wood, like a little matchstick almost.
Little matchstick type of
And
thing.
when that, with the force, what would happen is the wood would break, and that piece would flip up and make a bar.
So it
So
started-
it stuck in
It
the flesh of the whale.
It started like this, and then once it hit the whale, it opened up like that, and now it won't come out.
Oh,
So
clever.
Mr. Temple, but Anna and Mary Temple were good friends. So we think
But
that
they're from the
perhaps
same area.
yes, they are. So we're thinking that Louis Douglas was probably named after Louis Temple.
You know, that's the thing. When you're a woman and you're alone, so often the men are off to sea or whatever, you really find a good friend.
Well, that's how we became
That's how we
friends.
became good friends. And you depend on each other because there's not a whole lot of other situations you can depend on. Perhaps at your church, a little bit from the overseers of the poor, but you don't want to keep asking for things, you know. So you depend on each other.
It's true. It's true. Now, Anna, I also admire Anna because she lives not far from us, and we always talk about her laundry because
Oh, wait,
she seems to be able to make things so white.
Who is Anna? Is
Anna is Frederick's wife.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes, and she's a very nice woman. Well, we see her quite often.
Very hard worker.
Very hard worker, and she takes the children down to the port, you know,
In the
just
little
as
wagon.
we do in the little
We all
wagon.
do that.
We
I
all
mean,
do that.
it's free entertainment, you know, because there's always something going on at the harbor, and you take the children down and they're poking their little noses around, and you just, if you have a little wagon or a little box or something to keep them in, put wheels on it, you know, so you drag them around in it. It's a good idea. They can't go too far. And you get them good and tired, sitting in the sun or in the wind, and then when they get home, they actually sleep.
Which is nice.
Oh, yes.
Now, Mr. Douglas, of course, he first wanted to work down at the docks.
Right.
Because he was a caulker, you know, the one that puts the caulking in between the laths on the ship. But he was unable to get a position there. You know, it's very difficult. People don't realize when you have a large group of people coming in from various countries, they all want to protect their own little spots. Well, there were quite a few immigrants working on the docks as caulkers.
I think I know what
And
you're going
they
to say.
didn't want someone that was escaping slavery to cut their wages because now all of a sudden you're going to
Maybe
work
they
for
could
less.
work cheaper, you know.
Maybe they would be out of a job because they could find someone to work cheaper. So he was unable to secure a position there. But one of his first days here, after he'd been to the docks, he went down up to, because he was just around the corner from the Unitarian Church, and he was walking down the street and saw a delivery of coal being delivered. and it was actually the home of the pastor of the Unitarian Church. And so he knocked on the door and asked the woman, the wife, if he could have the honor of helping to put the coal away, and she agreed. And so he put the coal away, and she gave him 2 coins. And he talks of that quite freely, and Anna talks about that as well, as how proud
The
he
idea of
was.
earning your own money. And that was the wonderful thing about Anna. Anna had earned all her money, and she had bought all kinds of things. Essentially, she had her own, she was a free woman.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
she's
she-
the
and she-
one who bought all the tickets and all the things.
And she prized that tablecloth that she had, didn't she? She had a lovely tablecloth. And she just prized that. That was one of the many things that she brought with her to New Bedford. But he went on. Of course, someone heard him speaking, I believe at a little church probably, more than likely.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he became the famous man that he became. He went to Nantucket and spoke there, and then all of a sudden he was being asked to speak all over the place, even in Europe at one point.
Well, you know, the thing about that was when he went to Europe and all that, and after they left here, it bothers me a little bit.
They moved to
because
Lynn.
They moved to Lynn, and nobody seemed to pay any attention to the fact that the poor woman was there. Anna was by herself with the little children. There were 3 at that point.
And he was
And
gallivanting
he's
everywhere.
off living the high life, and she's there making shoes at home.
Yes.
You know, that's so typical of the male attitude. They think they're the breadwinners, but they're off doing their thing.
People were taking care of him, but nobody was taking care of her and the children.
She had
So
to
she
learn
made
that on her
shoes.
own.
She did her own card because she couldn't go out to work. Of course, she had the children. But she would, in Lynn, they did like a cottage industry where they brought the shoes in and she would stitch them and get paid piecework for that.
Well, that so much of that kind of work is done. I mean, you think about it. The men go off. Sometimes they never return. We have several young women of that ilk. And you know, as an example, Mr. Jones, you know Edward Coffin Jones, do you know him? He bought
Vaguely.
that lovely house on the hill from Mr. Roach.
Oh.
You might, I think another family bought it afterwards, but
Yes.
anyway,
The Duff-
Mr. Jones is in our lifetime, and he's a very, very nice fellow, but he's had terribly bad luck. He was only about 7 when his father passed away. Now, his father was not Quaker. His mother was a Quaker from Nantucket. When she married Reuben, oh, there was hell to pay. And her family disowned her. They drummed her right out of meeting.
Wow.
And she said, well, so be it. He's my husband, I love him, and I'm living my life with him. Well, as I say, when Edward was just about 7 years old, because I know he was talking about he wanted to run away to sea. Oh, he wanted to run away to sea. We always talked about that.
Oh, yes.
And he wanted to be just like his father. And then his father was lost at sea. So what ended up happening? You can imagine. He ended up being, he realized he couldn't leave his mother. That was just unconscionable. And so he ended up being apprenticed to Mr. Dunbar. And Mr. Dunbar had a ship chandlery. Well, Mr. Dunbar didn't have children. And so what ended up happening is that he helped along the way and eventually became a junior partner. And he did very well for himself.
Oh,
But
good
the
for him.
sad thing, Sally Coffin Jones. Coffin, oh heavens, the coffins over in Nantucket, they could buy and sell us all. And when you think about it, they had drummed her out of meetings. She said, no, I'm not going back. And even if his cousins go to Harvard, we'll let them go to Harvard. My boy will go to the School of Hard Knocks, but he'll learn. And he certainly did. And he's a very special young man. He really is. The sad thing is, though, by the time he had made enough money to buy that beautiful house, his mother had passed away. But here she was, at least a woman who knew how to read and write. She could teach school to children. She could take in money in different ways. Someone like Mariah Fleetwood, Mariah's, well, I shouldn't say this, but Mariah's a runaway. She was also a young woman who had escaped from the South. Married a free man But the poor fellow, he was a steward on one of the steamers, on the coastal steamers, and he was lost at sea.
Oh,
And here she is. She has 2 little children. She's a delightful human being, but she can't read and write. She takes in laundry. She does all kinds of work. She works so hard. Her children are in the same school with my grandchildren, and they're delightful children, little boy and a little girl. And quite frankly, I feel badly because I'd love to be able to have her do up my laundry.
Oh, we can't afford that.
But
I'm
we
afraid.
can't afford that either. You know, we have to do our own laundry. But certainly the people on the hill are very good about that. And there are ways that people can earn their living. You know. But you can't help but give people like that a lot of credit because they're really on their own. And fortunately, her little Mary is a lot smaller than my Liza. Liza grows like a weed.
Oh, doesn't she just?
So every time she outgrows something, she's the only girl in the family, so it makes it very convenient, and we just pass that right on to the next little girl. So Mariah's little daughter has a new dress. Might not
Nice.
fit her right away, but it will.
oh, ladies, you have been so generous with your time. I know
Our
I'm
pleasure.
keeping you away from your sewing, and I think
Oh.
I'm going to join you now. Can you
Uh-huh.
tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Well, we make these little kinds of things like this. Where's the nice, oh, here's one. Here's a good one. Here's the little whale. It's a little whale, and we've sewed all around the edges, but you see that it's hollow in the middle. And what we do is we'll fill it with cloves, or you could fill it with dried lavender, or with chamomile, or any number of things. Then you sew it all up, and you have one that has the little ribbon on it already. And then
there
you
it is.
sew it all together, and you hang it in your window, so
Clever.
that when winter comes and your house is closed in and it smells smoky and
Yes.
not very pleasant, well, what you do is you hang it in the window, and when the sun hits it, then you get that nice smell of clove. And it always smells like something good is cooking in the oven, even if it isn't.
Thank you. Thank you.